Hello everybody and welcome to this Telstra live virtual event. My name is Jeremy Little and I'm your host, and today we are joined by two experts that I'll introduce in just a second, and we are going to be talking to and about how to make apps work for your business. Now, very interesting topic that's going to cross a few other borders as well around the use of digital, and maybe we might even touch into the adoption of digital in culture as well. And how to adopt it into your organisation. But for everyone that's joining us on the platform, it's interactive. So we have bios for the speakers that you can go and have a read about us and about these guys. And you can move the windows around. We really want you to be interactive. That's one of the cool things about these events. So there's the ability for you guys to send questions into us, and we'll pick out the really interesting ones and I'll ask them of our guests today. So please be interactive. We're going to be asking some polls of you as well. So there's the topic, how to make apps work for your business. And our guests today are Justin Roche and Giri Ramachandran. I hope I pronounced that right. That Giri, thank you. So I'm going to allow you guys to introduce yourselves in a second so that you can tell the audience about yourself. But what we're going to do now is go to a polling question for you guys that are watching today. So what we'd love you to answer is, has your business started to use mobile apps for business productivity? Easy question, and I'm very interested to see the results. Now, while you guys are answering those questions, I'll shoot to our guests. So, Giri, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm General Manager for Mobile Applications and Managed Services at Telstra. I have about 20 years experience in enterprise, emerging technologies, both mobile and online. Last 15 years in mobiles, so I learned a thing or two along the way, and I hope to share that with you guys.
Fantastic. You must have been around when they were big bricks with
exactly.
huge aerials.
Exactly. The rap phone.
Way before the smartphone.
It was almost a defence tool as well.
Exactly, and it's just multi-purpose.
Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. And Justin?
Hi, yeah, my name's Justin Roche, CEO and co-founder of MSC Mobility. Been working in MSC for the last 15 years, so I've been an entrepreneur and focused on the digital transformation, I guess, from what was the website and then the internet infrastructure as a service space, and then into mobile, and mobile's absolutely just transformed a lot of what we see in the IT landscape. And I'm also the VP of consulting for GEMA in the Asia Pac region.
Fantastic. A kindred spirit. I'm an entrepreneur as well. I love interviewing entrepreneurs. You always get an interesting perspective. All right, so to split to the answers from our guests watching today, interesting, 41.7% yes, 58.3% no, so split. Very interesting. All right, so let's have a talk about what we're going to be going through today. Justin, can you take us through it, please?
Sure. So there's a couple of key messages I wanted to talk about. One was this whole digital transformation conversation. So a lot of people are probably sick of that phrase in the market, but it is a critical function inside a lot of organisations. And the way we're seeing it is either you embrace the digital transformation journey or you're going to be hit by the digital disruption inside your organisation. And that really starts driving a conversation about leadership. So who will actually lead the conversation? And then what applications are going to be driving that inside the business from a process perspective? We've got three great use cases or case studies we want to talk about. Some of them are enterprise focused, but a lot of the threads and a lot of the concepts underneath those would be equally applicable for the SMB, the small medium business space. And often small medium businesses have got an advantage in the sense that they don't have a lot of legacy infrastructure. So their ability to jump some of those integration hurdles is really good. And then we want to talk around some of the critical capabilities. So as you come through this, what do you actually have to have inside your organisation to be able to affect this transformation and defend yourself against disruption? And lastly, some takeaways. So what are the sort of 5 top things you could do tomorrow or on Monday to drive these outcomes internally?
Fantastic. The takeaways, I think, are the really interesting thing for the people listening in. They're always what we try to end with, so that's great. So why don't we jump into digital business? Why do we care?
So I think there's some really interesting transformations that have happened in the market, and it comes back to some of the major challenges inside organisations as they come to address the outgoing ageing workforce. So 25 to 35% of organisations will experience, all organisations will experience a 25 to 35% attrition as ageing workforce retire. So it's a huge amount of information and knowledge and skill and experience that's going to leave the business. And at the same time, over the next 10 years, digital natives are going to come into the organisation, and they'll represent around about 70% of the organisation. So digital natives already have expectations about technology and what it can do. They're already using apps. They've grown up immersed in this technology and this digital experience. But on the other end, you need to balance that with how do we actually capture and manage the experience and the information that's actually walking out the door and coordinate those outcomes. And what we have to do is look at the taxi industry being disrupted by Uber, hotel industry being disrupted by Airbnb, banks being disrupted by Alibaba. I mean, there's so many new entrants coming into established markets where the expectation of my competition has just been completely transformed. It's no longer, one bank competing against another bank. It's this bank now competing with two uni dropouts with an iPad and an AWS account, building the next fantastic delivery platform for, business B2B finance or B2B insurance.
And I work with many of them, and we've got some amazing homegrown talent creating these kind of businesses. I remember, and this I guess is the difference when I first saw an iPhone and I saw a screen full of apps, and I was like, wow, this is going to really change things. But we've got now people entering the workforce that never had that experience because it's been their life.
Yeah, yeah. There's no wow moment for them.
Yeah, it's
like the wow is you want me to use a Dell Latitude 3-kilogram laptop which doesn't have a touchscreen. That's going to be an awesome experience.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very rapidly changing workforce, isn't it? So you need leadership.
Absolutely, and I think this comes back to that conversation about who's going to drive this inside the organisation. So some stats from the analysts, you could choose an analyst, but this is an interesting one. Gartner is sort of talking about this idea that 75% of CIOs must lead the digital transformation, which is interesting because a lot of the budget for digital outcomes is now being owned by the business. It's around about 50%. And so on the one hand, the technologist inside the organisation is going to manage the legacy infrastructure, but they also need to start servicing more and more demand at greater speed from inside the business. And often within the business, you're beginning to see digital hothouses being created. So we had one government agency where we were talking to them about how they're enabling their end users. And government tends to be, I guess, a little bit slower than what you would say on the bleeding edge of technology and enablement in a lot of cases. Fast followers is probably where they want to be.
Even within government departments, there's varying differences, and some parts are moving much faster than other things. So there's so many differences that we find. But all it takes is somebody to get started.
Yeah.
That's a key part of it.
Yeah, and I think often what happens is that the IT director or the CIO, whoever is in charge of this application space, gets that knock on the door, and the director of infrastructure or whoever it is inside the business comes and says, here's my new app, and you need to look after this for me. And the CIO or the CTO is like, well, hold on, right? This doesn't comply with any of our standards. It doesn't do any of the things we need it to do. It doesn't even use the devices we want to use. We're not going to support it, which is a crazy thing to say because the business is trying to innovate and they're trying to disrupt themselves so they can go and disrupt their markets or drive better outcomes for themselves.
And what are you seeing in the SMB space with this, Gary?
No, absolutely. I mean, look, the business have moved, and as we know, even in the last 5-6 years, the email is widely adopted. And then you're starting to see simple, innovative things solving one or two point solutions to get that started, journey started, even in the SMB space. It's fantastic. And the thing is, like Justin was mentioning, there's no legacy systems to navigate. Actually, the faster, if you in the SMB space, you can actually implement these things much faster. You can try new things. And you're also starting to see a lot of tech one native smaller companies forming in the SME space. So it's fantastic. It's a great environment to be in at the moment.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So this comes back to that leadership conversation, and,
yes.
and I think the important point here is if the CIO or the CTO specifically, who typically look to as the drivers of digital transformation, don't step up to the plate, then somebody else is going to do it. And over time, the role of CIO and the role of Chief Technology Officer is going to diminish to purely operational. And what we're seeing in the market is that there really is these two speeds of delivery. One is that real digital transformational type journey of rapid deployment, least viable product from applications, getting material and information capability into end users' hands. And then there's the other side of the conversation, which is a legacy infrastructure where you've still got to keep the network running and the data center has to keep working and we've got to upgrade mail and platform and we've got to coordinate SAP and all those types of activities. And so how do you actually bridge both of those gaps? And so as we come through this process, the digital leaders will certainly rise to the top and become that executive digital leader, and the teams will change. So there'll be a lot less of the application developer and engineer and teams of security people, because a lot of that will be outsourced to other organisations as we come through this process, and a lot more of IT will be consultants and business analysts and partner and contract managers who are going to augment the ability to actually drive the outcome. And when we talk about innovation, I think in some respects IT struggle because they tend to be in the middle of the organisation, whereas innovation actually happens on the edge.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because you're clearly starting to see the blurring of the line between your notional, what's the functional business unit and what they're supposed to do. And the forward organisation, you're starting to see these teams work together and ideation together, because no one holds all the knowledge about it. So it's ideation, the teams that create, and those organisations that really foster that culture, rather than having those silos as a sequential process, are the ones who are transforming the industry. Because the best ideas in a business may come from someone else in IT, or the IT idea could come from a business. So that's really creating that environment. That's going to be the key, and creating that culture is fundamental.
It's difficult to be autocratic with technology, isn't it, when it's so pervasive, it's everywhere.
Yeah, I was talking to the Chief Strategy Officer of GEMA, which is a global mobile company that we're part of, and he said, when you talk about IT to lines of business, they talk about it in terms of air. Like, IT to a business function is as valuable to us as air. Well, we don't have an air department. So IT is so now blended inside the organisation, and so much of the innovation is coming from the front line, where we're exposed to the customer and we're exposed to the trends. And then we need to be able to pass that back. I think part of the challenge is how do you elucidate and elicit that information from the end user, because they're often so busily turning whatever they're turning and hitting whatever they're hitting to get the job done that they don't have time to step back and almost take a work on rather than work in perspective of the process.
So how does someone manage that? I think we've probably got a lot of CIOs, CTO kind of people on the, watching in today. They've obviously got a pretty big mandate already with what they're already dealing with. How does someone like that manage all these different disparate opinions on what technology people should be using?
I think my opinion is, you need to, at every point of the journey, step back and ask what, why, and then how, right? So you need to step back and ask the question, what is that you're trying to achieve? What's the end outcome you're trying to achieve? And then why you're trying to achieve it? If it's a customer satisfaction, really deep into it and find out why you're trying to achieve it. And then work out the how. Because we sort of sometimes get the sequence wrong. And it's really fundamental. And it is not about a sequential process at all, because the way in which the barrier to entry in some of these technologies is so low. And you have, shadow IT happening in many organizations, right? Yeah. And sometimes you have to embrace it and to get the innovation right in the organization. So it's so fundamental it really calls for a different culture, and the benefits are fantastic and huge if one who embraces that and adopts that. Right.
I agree, Gary. It comes down to that strategy, which is the why, what, and how conversation. I think it also comes down to how you actually deploy capability against the outcome. So, if you think back to 2006, 2003, 2004, a lot of the large banks, a lot of large insurance companies started hiring Accenture consultants and hired in Bain consultants and built their own internal consulting capability to go and consult their business unit. And I think it's a bit like that for IT now, where you're going to have specific capability you need to build to drive the digital conversation. You need to maintain skill set and capability around the legacy and think about how best to manage that, whether it's strategic to you and you want to maintain that, or whether you want to get that out of the organisation. Particularly as we see industrialisation of IT is well and truly down the path with cloud-based product sets, Azure, Office 365, Google.
Exactly.
There's a lot of skill sets out there which you can just buy on a per month, per day, per user basis. You don't have to own that yourself. But really driving that conversation around how we go and gather the information and gather the requirements and build out the requirements to satisfy the business outcome. I was talking to one of the architects, lead architects in one of the major banks recently, and he asked that question, like, how do we manage this? What is mobile doing to enterprise? And if you look at a lot of enterprises, it's been that water flow gated project management model of, we're going to start here and it's a 2-year program and we're going to roll out Windows XP, or we're going to upgrade SAP, or we're going to whatever massive thing we're going to go do. Mobile digital is a very different argument. Mobile apps are a very different argument. It's much more around how do I get the capability in their hands as fast as possible. 2-week sprints, least viable product, embed teams inside the business units and actually have them sit side by side and watch and monitor and analyse the business process. Whether that person who's actually analysing and documenting is necessarily going to write the script which actually puts the red button where the red button needs to be, whether that's going to be outsourced is irrelevant. And so IT, from what we're seeing globally, is moving away from being the service provider of choice to the service broker of choice. It was a really interesting report done by McKinsey, and they went and asked a lot of line of business managers and said, so you trust IT to provide you with all of your IT needs? And the answer was no, we don't. We expect them to provide certain things, but we will go direct to market. And you made the point earlier, Gary, about the barrier of entry to provide services is so low now. So business units themselves can go outside IT. And one of the things I strongly recommend to CIOs is develop a marketing plan, because you need to market to your internal users, because they will go and use the Apple iStore, and they will go and use Google Play, and they will go and download Azure or whatever it might be to drive the outcome, because it's just faster and easier for them from their perspective.
So the question of security is coming into my mind, but I want to get through some of the content. Maybe we'll come back to that later if we've still got time. So digital transformation. So a lot of the conversation we have, I guess, in IT circles, inverted commas, is that it's an IT problem, but it's actually a business problem. The entire business is what gets impacted by the outcomes. And back to the point earlier about budget moving out of IT and into line of business, it comes back to enterprise strategy. So, what is the digital strategy that is going to enable your employees? Like, how do we drive productivity inside the organisation and get operational efficiency? And on the other hand of that conversation is then the consumer conversation, which is how do I get better client engagement? How do I get deeper reach? It was interesting. We've seen this shift where digital decision making is moving away from IT into the marketing office. So I was talking to a friend in mobile and digital for one of the major 4 banks here, and he said it's amazing, and we're now seeing the CMO getting more hearing about the digital conversation than the IT director is. I'm like, that is an interesting outcome. And often the marketing director has twice the budget than IT have, and they're all about driving customer acquisition, customer engagement, revenue, and new product. Whereas legacy infrastructure just doesn't have the same ring, right? And so I think that's where it gets to. But the big point, sorry, Gary, is we're all consumers now. So I'm a customer, my employees are my customers, they're customers of you, and so the expectations around the experience is so much higher now. So my experience of my business environment is not the same experience I get from Uber or from Airbnb or from Car2Go or from pick a commercially user experience excellence type product. And a lot of end users are expecting that inside the organisation. So they go out and they use a booking on Airbnb, and then they come in and they use the SAP platform. Just chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
But the expectation from the end users.
And absolutely. And the importance of the UX, user experience and design is, I couldn't overemphasize it enough. Even within Telstra, we have an application business, and we do a number of projects with customers. And some of them, you wouldn't start the project. You spend 3 months refining exactly what the user experience we're trying to capture. At that point in time, do you actually need that information? It's almost like a minimalism to say that, because especially in a mobile environment, you have finite time. You're assuming that your target is moving, and then also there is only 2 information they need. They don't need the plethora of information. They have companion devices where they can go and get that information. So in that time, what information do I need? And just present that in the most consumable way. That's such an important part of it. So that whole UX customization, who better than the marketing department to think through that? And the sales teams, the customers themselves. You just go and pull and talk to the customer. The way in which you ideate in this is fantastic, and really, you have customers as part of ideation in some of those instances I've seen. So it's a great time to be, working and enjoying things, right? Yeah.
And it comes back to that design thinking, which is gained a lot of popularity. Comes out of physical design being now applied to software, now applied to enterprises and culture. How do you ideate? How do you go and identify the opportunity? And often the opportunities are actually being identified by the salesperson or by the marketing manager or the product person or the customer service person. And it's not for a while until those things bubble back inside the organisation. So, one of the massive opportunities inside businesses is to leverage digital to capture that information and move and change the culture inside organisations. Because I think we've got a ton of technology, And what destroys technology projects is typically not that we can't get a screen in a form on a screen and connect it to whatever database. It's actually, how do I get Jane, who's been working in this role for 6 years, to change her behaviour and adopt this new way of doing things? And so, the toys, inverted commas, and I hear this so often from IT departments, the businesses want toys. So no, the business want outcomes. and they'll gravitate, if a toy comes with the outcome, that's a bonus, that's Christmas. But ultimately it's about how do we actually affect the outcome. And so you come back through this from the perspective of what competencies internally do we need to start driving these outcomes. And it comes back to the use case. Where are the use cases? Who has that use case? How do I understand that use case and document that use case? And we come through the back of that conversation into this area of master data management. So, we've got all this content information. How do I leverage that information and that content from the perspective of being able to gain insights at the point of action? So I'm now starting to do analytics. I'm now starting to do heuristic analysis on these information. And so often we talk about getting intelligent answers. Intelligent answers come from intelligent questions. And then you move through this area, which you were talking about earlier, is the risk management, the security. So many organisations treat all information the same. And all information is not the same. And if you ever talk, if you say to somebody in the business, we're going to force you through multi-factor authentication and complex passwords to get access to your email, the user's going to go, well, hey, hold on. 95% of my email is just internal tic-tac workflow. 5% of that's actually got any kind of security classification that anybody cares about. And so this big hammer approach often upsets the workplace. And finally, it's about how do you craft the business case to drive the outcome. So how do you go and justify to the person who does actually have the money, who is less and less the IT director and more the sales director or the marketing manager or the operational manager, that this is actually going to have a viable impact upon their outcomes. And so moving away from often the internal IT metric conversation to the business conversation. The director of sales cares about data sales outstanding. He doesn't care about internal rate of return on a project. He wants to shift that needle. Yep. And so understanding what are the KPIs and what are the metrics that the business users operate by, not applying the IT jargon to it's an XYZ or an ABC, because they are very different things.
Yeah. We find, as being in Telstra, we invest quite heavily on understanding the customer first, and we segmented so deeply in several industries, size, and whatnot, because that's really such an important part of it. So the topics that what Justin touched on, you put another lens through it. That's a different approach. Depending on your size and the industry and how advanced your industry is, right? So you need to really understand how to structure it and execute it, and that's where we're spending a lot of time. And we identify. And the good news is that lots of solutions out there that help you. Like you mentioned about analysis and data analytics tools and stuff that's coming out in the market. We're not talking about millions of dollars of investment. There are simple tools that give you exactly actionable insights into what you can do. So it's really venturing out and giving it a go, and it's a great time. I keep saying that. It's a great time to be.
Well, I think it comes back to some of the conversation earlier. It's happening. And you now get to choose whether you want to make it happen or you want it to happen to you. Yeah. So, you don't have a choice in this. It's going to move on. Digital natives are going to come through and disrupt the organisation. You're going to lose a percentage of your workforce. Applications are going to come through the doors. People are going to bring their own devices, even if it's just their secondary device, even if it's the iPad because you gave them the iPhone or the Galaxy Note or whatever it might be. And people are going to bring their peripherals and connect them. A great one is the latest release of the iWatch operating system. So now iWatch will leverage your Wi-Fi to talk to your iPhone if you're not near your iPhone. And you go, well, hold on, so what does that do to the Wi-Fi network? So there's a whole bunch of infrastructure guys going, what does this mean? And suddenly from a security perspective, it's like, well, there's another threat vector. So people can attack the watch, right? So what does that mean? And it's a consumer device. It's not built as an industry military grade device. And Gavin, Trev, Barry, Jane and Harriet are going to go and buy one because they're, from the Cupertino cult. They love that stuff. They're just going to go and buy it. And you can't say no.
I think it's, and what I'm hearing, to paraphrase what you guys have said, because I heard it in a few different ways, is that, either you're going to embrace digital transformation and increase digital literacy across all layers of the company, or something's going to happen in order for the sand to shift underneath you. And I see this a lot with startup guys. They see inefficiency in a bit large organisation and they get frustrated by it and they think, oh, I can do this better.
Yeah.
And that's the genesis of a new company that's potentially your future disruptor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And recognizing that frustration is an opportunity, right? You need to sit there and listen to it and step down from, you know, wherever hierarchy you're sitting to just go and have a chat with them, right? Just go and, well, like, what is that you do?
Yeah.
And it's not like you're developing an application and forget about it. You know, you got to wonder on how it's being used. And again, I come back to the same point. It is not hard to measure these things nowadays. You can actually go and run analytics on these things and you know, get the feedback, who's using it, what time, when, you know, are they using it in the train. All that stuff is available to you.
Here we've got an interesting question from the audience, so why don't we go to that one. Thank you, Alex, for your question. I've never launched a business app before. Where would I start?
So I presume that the question is launched a business app into the public market, or is it B2B? Because those two things are a little bit different in terms of how you might, which I know is the classic consultant's response. Well, it depends.
Well, I would imagine that it's probably launching a specific app for their business internally. Like, why don't we use that as a case?
Okay.
I would still go back to my mantra of what, why, how, right? So you go back to what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, what is the problem you identify, what problem you're trying to solve, and why you're trying to solve the problem. Just have a deeper insight into that problem, because that kind of opens up the discussions around it. Then there's various parts. You know, there's packaged apps, a number of packaged apps available, and Telstra sells some of those services as well. And then they may be the simplest way to execute it in terms of time to market. Also custom app development, then you kind of work through the number of partners we've got, and where they will sit and work with them, really understand it and define it. And there's a number of categories of apps, you know, as a B2C app, you know, or whether you're doing it within the business, or is it for communicating with your suppliers. All that need to stack up together. And the most important point is also it's a living thing. It's not like you just launched the app and forget about it. It needs to be nurtured and grown and modified, tweaked. It's a constant process of evolution. We need to do that.
So I'm going to assume that Alex has done all those things. He actually knows why he's built the app and he's deployed the app for a reason, and he's trying to drive uptake. So key things in driving uptake inside the organisation. One is short update cycles. So you want to be running agile project management. You want to be running 2-week sprints with 4-week deliverables. You want to be constantly in touch with the users you're deploying to. It's a big mistake to go and spend 6 months building something which you think is amazing and go and give it to somebody and they go, what is this thing? It doesn't make any sense. I've done that before. It's a horrible experience. I don't recommend you do that. And then you want to, if it's internally from a business perspective, you want to go and get some evangelists. So you want to go and find people inside the business who are going to use it and get them to champion the conversation. And ideally you want the subject matter expert. You want the guy at the top of the pinnacle who does the whatever it is that your app does, who's going to get the most benefit, and get them socialising and supporting and driving the conversation. You know, always consider org change management. So org change management is about people resist change. How do you convince them that what you're doing is for the better? How do you make it as easy as possible for them to move to the new world order? And what disincentives are you going to put in place to stop them from staying where they are? So it's a bit like the old donkey scenario. They put the carrot in the front and the stick at the back. But if you want to drive uptake internally, that's what you need to do. If you're going into broad market, so you're selling this to as a public-facing app, it's really about driving that social conversation, because most people are going to use that device or use that app are most likely going to be digital natives. So, you know, if you want to go and catch zebra, where do you go? You go to the water hole, so you know they're all going to turn up. So you need to go to whatever that watering hole is. So whether that's, you know, Instagram and Facebook or LinkedIn or Pinterest or Twitter or whatever it might be, to drive that conversation. And then you need to start creating some events which are going to drive the conversation towards you. So, you know, a bit like the honeypot conversation. Like what can I create which is going to drive or pull? And all those things are equally applicable in the business context. Back to the earlier conversation, we're all a consumer, right? So, you know, if you want outcomes, we had a great conversation recently with the government department where they'd released their public app, and they were not prepared for the type of feedback they got back, which is a cultural internal thing you need to be ready for. The first time the developers actually had, very direct, very formal, and not always positive feedback on the apps. Like, oh, they hate us, they hate us. It's like, no, they're just giving you constructive feedback and maybe not constructive words. But ultimately, it's about how you actually enable that conversation inside the organisation to drive the outcome you're chasing.
I think it's an interesting point on innovation, and it's a tricky conversation to have in large organisations, because to innovate inherently means you need to be willing to want to improve on what you're doing already.
Yeah. Or potentially, and more difficultly, you may need to actually cut off or go out and slaughter the sacred cow, and go and find and invest in the rising star. The Kodak is a great example of an organisation that invented digital photography in the late 70s, 80s. And then hit it because they had 80–95% of the film industry, the physical film, plastic film industry, and yet that was exactly what came through and destroyed their business.
The other view that we form is that people always think about innovation means invention, right? Two different things, right? Innovation can be a process change just to derive a business benefit. It doesn't have to be the new thing that no one has ever. We're not going to invent the next Facebook. It can be a simple process as that. So there's a confusion between what is innovation and invention. We tend to almost associate a lot more with invention rather than innovation. So there's a lot of opportunities to simplify processes, and that's available for the user. And the organization should cultivate a mechanism so that percolates up to decision makers. It is capturing those frustrations, capturing those little things and feeding that back. Those are all the golden opportunities. One man's pain is another man's opportunity, business opportunity. That's all it is. And we all help each other, and we're all happy. So,
and innovation is new for you. So it might be old hat for some people, but for you it's new. And it comes back to this conversation about, where do you start? And most organisations go through this process of they start with the convenience-orientated conversation, like apps and very workflow siloed type capabilities, then into supporting broader processes, and then off the back of that process conversation into the innovation. And ultimately it comes back to where is the low-hanging fruit. So where is the best place to start and start driving the outcome. And a lot of the disruption we're seeing is actually at the business model level. So you've architectured your business a certain way, you've invested, you've got all these people doing the things they're doing, you've got all the infrastructure and IT in place, and disruption starts coming into the market. You've then got to reverse engineer how do we get to the business model. So what was the business process, and what inside the business process can we alter or change? And it doesn't have to be huge to start with. It can be an evolutionary thing to begin with as you cut your teeth and get a better understanding and feel of the culture inside your organisation from a change management perspective. But then go through and look at things like, what are the new models and processes we can introduce, so that innovation space, or what is the augmentation? And it's really about building the business apps in the middle there, like connecting those dots and enabling those outcomes, because that's where you're going to start driving the most output. We're organisations we've worked for in the past and really structured hierarchical top-down organisations who've come through this transformation, and they've said, look, we're going to open up our offices to flexible work environments. So you can work from home, you can work from the cafe, you can work from the client site, but at least half of you aren't going to work from here. And that had a huge impact upon the culture. It suddenly became a much more exciting and engaging place to be. By the way, they did an excellent job of providing the tools to support that change, and they did an excellent job of going through the org change management part of enabling people to feel comfortable working at home. But the outcome was improved employee engagement, reduction in staff turnover, improved client outcomes, because at the end of the day, if you've got happy staff, you'll get happy customers. There's a clearly and well-proven connection between those two things. And then ultimately it got to the point where they were just removing floors. So you think about the cost of electricity and floor space and desks and telephones and all that supporting infrastructure. They were saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a month just in those basic things. And their efficiency didn't drop, it actually improved in the medium term. Obviously, as you go through any kind of transformation process, there's going to be that dip where people get the adjustment or they adjust themselves out. But off the back end of that, they had a huge ramp up in terms of productivity and efficiency.
One thing we found is that we work a lot with clients and we love that. We implemented a simple methodology called moment of truth, right? This is really going directly root to the root of the problems and the opportunities we address. The methodology is simple, right? So there's 10 things you can do, but 3 of them will have the maximum impact. I'll take an airline industry example. The airline industry, the moment of truth, how the customer measure you is based on whether your flight arrives or leaves at time, whether your luggage, you're able to pick it up easily or leave, or your meal preferences, if you have one, was delivered to you promptly. If there's 10 things you're going to fix, but if you focus on those 3, you're going to have a disproportionate amount of return on your investment. So you need to really understand what problem you're solving and what's the most effective, and that's such a important theme here.
Which is interesting, right? Because the way that airlines actually measure their economic unit is backsides on seats, right? So, you know, getting somebody on a seat, because once the plane's gone, the plane's gone. I can't fill those 5 seats that are now flying to America.
Perishable. Yeah.
Right? But getting backsides on seats is absolutely connected to the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
So if I can give the person their first meal preference, if I can get the plane away on time, if I can get them to land on time, if they don't lose their luggage, you know, that's critically important to driving that economic metric inside the business.
I hope your trip to this weekend is good, Justin.
I've had the travel god's curse on the way back from South America, so I think I'm good for the next 10 years.
Okay.
I think I lost my luggage 3 times, so it was an awesome experience.
All right. On that note, we're going to go to the next poll from the question. Next poll for our audience listening in, and for those of you listening in, we've got a question up here. In the next 12 months, when do you see the use of mobile apps ramping up within your business? Whilst our audience is answering that question, we'll go to another one from the audience. And I think this is an interesting one for you, Gary, but we'll ask you to speak up a little bit louder on this one. Sure. I have no experience of building apps, none whatsoever. Where would I go to start the process?
As a business, is there a qualification, or should I make an assumption here?
I'm going to say it's someone within a business that wants to go and build an app for their business, or try and implement one. Where would they start?
I think you have to define what problem you're solving and what outcome you're seeking. That's always a starting point. And if those things are not clear, you can get onto a journey and waste a lot of time for an outcome that will become a technology Vietnam, like a long drawn out war with no result.
No obvious winners.
So you don't want technology Vietnams. So you want to focus on things that are what problem you're solving is a fundamental thing. Once you've done that, you want to think through whether that the need that you're trying to address, can it be solved by something that already exists? That's the packaged applications. It maybe is, because there are lots of people sitting in there thinking through what could be someone else's problem and building those apps. There's billions of them coming up every day. So you need to look at that, because that's again an efficiency point of view. Then once you get past that, there are a number of ways in which you can go and build applications. Telstra has got packaged applications as well as some platforms we can do, and a number of other people, other technology providers have got a number of platforms available too. You just think through it. What's your budget? What are you trying to achieve? What's the time frame that you want to achieve this? All that come into factor. Think through it, but there's just plenty of help, and we are here to help as well. If there's anything specific on that, for more information, we're happy to help.
Yeah, I totally agree with Gary's understanding the why, and then the how. A lot of the challenge I think organisations come across is their first app is like the initial cut, right? And so part of the challenge is as you come through this process of building that first app, you're going to set a whole bunch of standards for the next app, and the next app, and the next app, and the next app. So as you come through this process, particularly in the business context for users, you want to step back and go, okay, so I understand why I'm doing this. I've got my evangelists lined up. They've given me all the great information I need to go and build it. What are the standards that I want to have in place as I come through this process? Because at some point you will have 100 apps. So I've worked in enterprise for many years, and many of my customers are enterprise. And so many organisations run on Microsoft Access and Excel, right, where there are no standards. It's just, it's going to build a database and put it onto the desk, and now we're running a trading floor on that Access 2 database. That's not good, right? And so understanding what those standards are, and then think a little bit ahead, because it's very exciting. Like the creative process of building a new app and helping somebody else, like, you're really excited. But there's a whole bunch of what happens next when I want to get it on the phone. So operationalization and of the application is key. So, working with Telstra and a number of Telstra's partners, a lot of the partners we've worked with have come out of digital agency space. So they've come from marketing and design, which is fantastic. So they make some amazing products. But when you get to the IT service management and operate part, it's like, oh, we've got no idea about that stuff. Like we've got people in the back room who drink Jolt Cola and eat pizza, deal with that stuff, right? And it's like, well, we actually need some hooks because we've got to put this on a real live user with a real live device. So that would certainly be my suggestion. Obviously, after all the things that.
And the joint ideation is such an important thing, right? So you need to have the people, together, working together. The guy who's got the need and the guy who knows what could go wrong. All of them together working on a minimum viable product and then building on that. Yeah. It's such an important part of it. Right?
I wouldn't necessarily go and. My first choice wouldn't to go and build a development team inside the organisation.
No.
My first option would be, can I take something off the App Store and tweak the process so it's good enough, or go and partner with somebody who does this for a real living, because it's a huge investment internally.
Exactly.
If you're going to go now, if you're a large bank or you're in rocket science or fuel dynamics or something where the algorithm you're going to create is exceptionally specific and your IP and drives value in your organisation, absolutely have that inside your organisation. So much of what gets built is a guy in the field with a sensor and a form, passing information back, getting information on that device. It's been done many, many different ways, many, many different times by people smarter than me, so why would I go and build that application myself? Exactly. It doesn't make sense.
I think you touched on an important one. It's like, is it for external use or internal use? And if it's for internal use, there's probably other organisations that face similar problems that have thought about this before, that have tried to solve it. And then if it's going to become a core part of your intellectual property, that's probably something that's pretty smart to be building yourself rather than trying to license it in or adopt something else. Okay, so let's look at the answer to the poll question. Again, split evenly within the next 12 months, but that's interesting.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Okay, so let's jump through to the next one. So we've got some case studies now.
Yep. So I'm happy to run through these. So this is a government case study in field service working. This is a large police force in Australia, and part of the challenge that they had was how do we actually, on the one hand, get better policing outcomes. So, if you're in politics, police and emergency services is a hugely politicised conversation. So if I can put more police on the street visibly, then that has a direct correlation to electoral outcomes, right? So that was the driver. The other driver was, how do we create a better user experience for frontline police? It is a stressful job, as you can imagine, and they've got a lot of digital natives coming through the colleges, and they don't want to be given old clunky technology. They want to be on the leading edge, and obviously we want to support them as best we can. And so in this particular case, and this organisation is really, I guess, in some respects, a real poster child of how a large government enterprise with massive security requirements, massive legislative requirements around what they do, can be nimble and efficient in driving the digital journey. And so we're now deploying peripherals around wearable technology that's coming through, the ability to geotag and capture information, persons of interest. Even the public experience of interacting with a police officer is much more efficient because they can capture the information. It's not they go and sit behind you in their car and spend 10 minutes typing on whatever that big thing was. They capture that information very, very efficiently and very, very quickly. And so that's been a huge benefit. And they're still very aggressively pursuing the digitisation process with another 20, 30 applications in the pipeline. And I think from the value of the ecosystem here was really important. I think maybe you might want to
absolutely. And that's one of the key things that what Telstra have done with that particular client situation, where we were able to provide the devices. We were able to fulfill the devices. We were able to work on the applications, and then also with the Justin's organization in terms of providing the managed services around it, because that's just such a critical part of it. It's 24/7 security, as you can imagine. But the moment of truth is whether you're able to, if that device in that situation is everything orchestrated and able to deliver the result you want. And if it is not, people are unhappy. So you need to actually cater to that, and then you need to have this big orchestra ensemble that needs to happen invisibly for produce that result, and that's exactly what we've done that with partners.
And I think one of the key elements of that conversation was, on the way through this process, they built a platform for digital transformation. So it wasn't a spot event and it occurred and it went away and then it happened over there. It was, no, we've actually got an architecture in place now with the support infrastructure and the change management infrastructure and the orchestration architecture in place, so that when we deliver an outcome, we're confident that the quality is going to be there for the police officer. And police officers are often in very dangerous situations, and so these tools are critically important. to their livelihood.
So how did they do that? How did they test that the users would actually use the technology that they were implementing before rolling out this big spend?
The number of trials, and there's no better way. You can't sit in the beat and think about how they're going to say really trialing it. Pilots are such an important part of it, and get feedback, refine and refine. And I would say that even when you go and deploy an application, it's still learning, right? Because you come back in 6 months' time, you'll come up with about a laundry list of things that you could improve. One of the things that we're working with, the same thing, is that the same entity at the moment is body-worn cameras, right? So it opens up different dimension of issues. Yes, the utility that you would derive from a body-worn camera is fantastic. You can get all that. Then we need to start to think about the privacy implications or something like that. So, and whether you have the authentication and authorization to do that work while you're doing that. So it requires process change, and then your solution should map back to that, and you should need to have the security and the repository of those information available to you any point in time, auditable, right? Because if something goes wrong, you'll be able to go.
Chain of custody is huge.
These things are way too complex for the stuff that goes on to deliver a simple outcome is very, very hard. And that's exactly what that client is doing, and it's fantastic how they are investing in it and exploring that.
I think it comes back. I think it comes back to Alex's question earlier, right? So I'm deploying my first app. Like, go and build evangelists, go and pilot it, go and test it, get feedback. Run the live trial, put them in the field, do the ride along. How does this work? How might it change? And once you've got a solid cohort of people who are going, yeah, this is fantastic, then use them to take the message to the rest, and support them in delivering that information, and provide the training, and provide the support, and provide, the underlying architecture which actually enables the transformation side of the business.
And so we touched on security again, and we've got a question from Manuel in the audience. So thank you, Manuel, for your question. He's asking, I presume it's a he, around security standards compliance. Are there standards to follow? Like, obviously with privacy, there's privacy laws, but what other standards are there in security? So
there's a bunch of frameworks that are out there. ISO 27001 would probably be the most common set of standards, and then you've got COBIT as a risk management for IT type framework, which also sits in there. Six Sigma, from a process perspective, talks to the enablement and delivery of security outcomes. But I think the ultimate reference manual for most organisations is that 27001 item. I think where mobile becomes really interesting and really challenging is how it implements security. So if you think about, for example, antivirus and digital threats, mobile operating systems, as an example, are designed to avoid that because they sandbox the data. So suddenly you've now deploying applications to devices going, I don't have a virus issue, but you have application behavioural issues. So you start analysing the behaviour of the application and the types of calls it makes and the types of things it asks for. So the classic one is the iPhone Torch app. Right, like it would ask for your geolocation, your microphone, access to your social media passwords and feeds, your address book. It would ask you for your blood type. I mean, it would just ask for all this, and it's a torch. Like it's to light the darkness. What do you want to post on my Facebook? I mean, it's just, and so many organisations in the app space, particularly the consumer app space, make their money by selling your information. So as an enterprise, particularly if you're doing consumerization like BYOD or allowing people to put apps onto the device, you need to be confident that you're not opening up Pandora's box to threats coming in via these apps. And most of it's data loss prevention, and identity theft is probably the worst case of that.
I would strongly consider, like there's people specializing in security. There are organizations, including Telstra, are specializing just on the security practices. Talk to them, right? And stand on the shoulders of elders, right? Please, I think that's the simplest thing, and talk to a lot of people. And there's also a lot of publicly available material on these things, right? Yeah. So you don't even have to spend anything; just kind of look through basic standards and all that. So it's a really interesting time. There's opportunities to do that and address that, and it's so important. I couldn't overemphasize that.
I think the security conversation is a massive conversation. You were saying earlier that you had a session on security. I think one thing we know for sure is that you will be hacked. I think Apple have proven that. Right? We've had the Xcode intrusion So it's as much about how do we prevent people getting into the environment and running amok, but more importantly, how do we identify when things are going wrong and how we address those outcomes. So that becomes critically important. I love this particular use case because it really demonstrates the integration of digital to actually enable the front line. And so this organisation is actually a US-based oil and gas organisation, and what they essentially did was they go out and they do assessments and repairs and fixes on large infrastructure and complex infrastructure, so pumps and mining equipment and oil and gas, stuff that bigger brains than mine understand. But one of the problems they had was they had a significant outgoing of older staff retiring, and so a lot of intelligence, a lot of IP, a lot of knowledge is leaving, and so they implemented a tool set whereby younger engineers, and by younger I mean 30, 40-year-old engineers as opposed to the 60, 65-year-old engineers, younger, where they could actually reach in as digital hands and actually support those engineers in those circumstances. So they almost had a brains trust which was centralised, available to these other people to be able to drive those outcomes in the field and communicate with them. So when you look at the tooling side, that's it's social, it's communications, it's awareness, it's video and data capture, it's all those things. But from an outcome customer perspective, it's actually about getting the job done right the first time. Because what's horrible is when you get that moment and you turn up on site and you don't have the right tool to fix the D70 bulldozer, or you thought it was a D70 bulldozer, it's actually a D40 and it's a different make, and suddenly you've got to drive 2 hours back. And so there's downtime. So integrating both the asset management and data capture and intelligence from the older workforce was critically important in that conversation.
Justin seems to know all about bulldozers as well, which is fantastic.
So we've got about 5 minutes left before we're going to have to wrap up. We've got a few questions coming in, but a lot of people have been asking that or wondering where to start. They don't know what first step they should take to get started in this. So what do you think is this for someone that doesn't know where to start? What's the first thing that they should do?
So the first thing I would do, and it's coming back to the conversation we had earlier, is understand at a level of detail what the least viable product is. So and write it down articulately and get somebody else to read it, because we make a bunch of software developers make a bunch of assumptions, and BAs make a bunch of assumptions about nomenclature and taxonomies and information that comes out. And once you've got a clear understanding of what it is that you need to do and why you're doing it, the next part of that conversation is how do you actually want to get that serviced? Who's going to service that need? Are you going to service the need? Or are you going to outsource the servicing of that need? Or are you going to go and buy something off shelf and then integrate the business process and augment that? That's sort of the next sort of key decisions about the how of going and doing.
My view is that even stepping back from that is that what industry you're in, right? Who do you consider as the leaders in that industry? Big or small doesn't matter anymore. And look at international as well. Everything is accessible straight away. Look at all those examples and see what they're doing. What's the industry best practice? It's probably a couple hours of research on Google, right? You'll be surprised what you would find out. Then that gives you a source of inspiration. Then you go back and check, okay, well, if we are to, is that the problem I'm trying to solve? And then why are we trying to solve that? What's the benefit of it? Then you think about the same routine. Is it something already available, I can make use of it, or should I go and build something? So it's same routine. I think definitely that's secondary research. Look at your industry, what's happening, who's using it, you'll get commentary. The world is moving towards what I call is this trifecta of social, video, and mobile, right? So you get that combination of the three things, this immense amount of information available to you. Even videos on where to start, they're pretty short. Yeah. YouTube is abundant source of
Dummy's Guide to JavaScript
exactly.
and mobile backend as a service. A lot of organisations are actually looking at third parties to come in and actually build capability. A lot of organisations are also thinking about, do we build internal teams? And again, I'd suggest building internal teams is a great idea if you've got real IP that you want to protect. But a solid 50% of organisations are actually looking at external agencies to come in and support them, whether it's a contractor or a digital agency or whether it's a systems integrator to come and provide that information. And again, if it's workflow oriented as opposed to deep mathematical calculations, artificial intelligence, it's probably better to get get somebody outside the organisation to do that, because they've probably done it a dozen times. They'll have a whole bunch of Lego bricks which they can just pull together, and they leverage their IP to provide you with a cheaper, faster, better outcome. But ultimately it comes down to fully understanding what is going to be my 2-week release cycle, what am I going to release in each cycle, who needs to be informed through this process, and how do I actually drive that outcome through the development life cycle, and then in to operate that application.
So I'm skipping through a lot of this research because we're running short on time now. There was a question, and this again, we're getting more stuff coming through on another example from Jenna about writing an app for a not-for-profit that has to do with allowing volunteers to log their travel.
Yep.
Again, the question is, how do I start? But I'm going to match that with another question, because someone said, what can Telstra do for me that I can't do for myself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have obviously reach, and everyone is linked, and many of them are serviced directly by Telstra as well as channel partners within Telstra. We have built capabilities, and exactly what you're talking about in terms of by industry, a lot of use cases. Just contact us and we'll come and take you through the number of case studies we've done, and then see if anything resonates with you. And if it is not the next stage of the journey, we can bring in the partners who have done many more case studies and really narrow it down. And this process doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. It can be a pretty simple 2 or 3 meetings, and we'll be able to get to a point, because there are a number of variables here: the budget, what they want to achieve, all that. We'll be able to triangulate all this reasonably quickly. Just call us.
And we've got a poll up for those in the audience right now, our last poll before we finish up. Sorry, Justin.
I was just going to say, don't underestimate the amount you have to learn, because it's enormous. Yeah. And back to your point earlier, Gary, about standing on the shoulders of giants. One of the great value adds that Telstra brings to the conversation, if you don't mind me saying, yep, as a Telstra partner in this conversation, is the ecosystem and the insight, the deep insight in how to actually get to done. Because back to your Vietnam comment, like so many of these projects start, and then 6 months down the track, the project gets pulled because something else becomes more important, and that project was going to go nowhere anyway. So how do you, speed of execution, how do I get to done quickly, and how do I get done at a level of quality which is going to still be viable for the use case that I'm trying to solve?
And one point I want to mention is that no application is done in isolation, because it requires the right device, it requires the right support. So even though it's a small thing, you need to consider all of them together. So as a mobile supplier to many customers and meeting those needs, we're definitely starting to look, that's the application space is really, it's important. What is important to our customers today as well as in the future is very, very important to Telstra. That's exactly where we are.
And it's often what people have done badly. Those stories are is equally valid and useful as...
Absolutely, yeah.
We've had customers who've said, we're going to deploy a mobile application and we're going to push it out, and by the way, we're going to give you a 500 megabyte payload per release every 2 weeks. We're like, what? So we're going to connect these to Wi-Fi, right? Oh, no. We're just going to push it across 3G. Right. So they might be able to use it at the end of the first week, but then you're going to give me another payload. So, and it's just sort of some of those more basic things.
So we've got a bunch of takeaways here, which I'm going to let people read through because I've only got a couple minutes left. And we had another question come in, and it seems to be a theme from the people that are watching in today. So thanks everyone for all your questions. I normally ask you guys, our guests, for one key takeaway. This one says, what's the key takeaway for a novice? So why don't we use both examples, one key takeaway for a novice and one key takeaway for someone that's got a little bit more experience in this area.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the key takeaway from a novice is don't be scared of the technology. The biggest problem you'll face is not the technology. The biggest problem you'll face is getting uptake and making the people who are going to use it adopt it. So technology doesn't fail. We've been doing this for many, many years now, many decades, isn't that right?
Yeah.
It works. We know it works. It's actually getting the change in the organisation to actually ramp that. That's critically important. And you haven't written a line of code yet, right? So fix that problem before you go writing code.
And what about for someone a little bit more experienced, maybe?
Well, I think the thing is that the IT processes have been around for a little while longer than mobile processes. So you need to look at the most important process where you can add value. It could be a customer-facing process, or it could be a field service process. You want to pick that process and then start to build through, hey, how else it can be improved. So then you're really targeting a problem that will give you the maximum return on your investment, and then start to work through from there.
Fantastic. Well, it's time to wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
Thanks
for coming. It's been a pleasure hosting you. Thank you everyone that's been tuning in today. It's been a very interesting conversation. Disruption and transformation is a pet project, is a pet love of mine, so it's very interesting. And for those that are still on the line, please stay on. You're going to get sent to a little survey. We really love to hear from you afterwards so that we know what we can do better next time. Justin, Giri, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody. You've been with us on this Telstra Live virtual event. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.